Newcomers join the show today. Michelle Dhanani leads the way. Cloud native tales they've got to share. In this journey we all will dare. Evolving tech with every step. Innovating with each prep. From zero to hero they cannot test. Watch and learn from the very best. This my journey episode to ride. Michelle's wisdom as our guide.
Welcome back to My Journey, everyone, where we explore the fascinating stories of cloud-native pioneers and community builders. I'm your host, Steve Wade, and today we're joined by someone who's shaped many of the tools and workflows that I know we all use in the cloud-native ecosystem. So today's guest is Michelle Dhanani. She's a principal software engineer and founding member at Fermyon Tech, and was a core maintainer of the Helm project, which I know everyone uses or has used previously. And is currently now pioneering the future at Spin with WebAssembly. So I first met Michelle when she was working at Deas with Lachlan back in 2017 at KubeCon Berlin. And yeah, I've been impressed with all of her contributions since. So yeah, Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to see you again.
Yeah, a long time. We realized that last time we spoke was probably like 8 years ago. So I want to start right back at the beginning. So you're well known for your work on Helm, having been one of its first and early contributors and core maintainers. So could you take us back to those early days and explain what drew you to the project?
Yeah, and when we talk about Helm, we usually start with this hackathon story, which it did come out of a hackathon, but I kind of want to take a step back because I think it's fun to know a little bit more. So I was working at a company called Engine Yard circa 2014, 2015. And we were building a platform as a service. Basically, it deployed Ruby applications, Ruby on Rails applications to AWS. And there was this one-click deploy sort of situation and UI, and you can upgrade things and add databases and all that good stuff. And we added support for PHP and a few other languages. But quickly, like the leadership wanted to grow the business even more. And so we realized, okay, well, how are we going to do that? And Docker started becoming a thing at that time. So we started thinking, okay, well, if we have a container platform, then we don't have to worry about the actual programming languages. We can just deploy containerized applications, and then our market will grow and our business will expand, and that'll be really great for everybody involved. And so we did that. We built a container platform really early, and no one came. And we realized, okay, people don't actually know about containers yet, and they don't know how to containerize an application. I mean, we just learned ourselves, so that makes sense. And so we spent some time doing some education on that. And then we realized during that, educational exchange, talking to a bunch of people, that it would be really great if our platform was also vendor agnostic. And if it didn't just deploy on AWS, if it deployed on any cloud, that would be really cool. And so we started building a platform as a service, containerized application. Obviously, we were 100% bought into containers at this time. And it would help deploy and manage containerized apps. And a PaaS is a complex application. So we needed a way to deploy and orchestrate and manage these things. And we chose Kubernetes for that. And then we deploy these complex things. We needed a way to develop them quickly. We needed a way to manage them as a unit. And so we had this hackathon around this time. And there were 3 people, including my current CEO, Matt Butcher, who founded this project. It was a package manager. And I was in the audience, and at that time it wasn't called Helm, it was called Kate's Place, like K-A-S, Kate's Place. And I thought that was so cute. I was screaming like in the front row. I was like, oh my God, this is so cute. I'm like loving it. And so they put me on the project because I was really enthusiastic. And so that's how I got on the project, actually, and started contributing. And we launched it at the first KubeCon in like somewhere in Silicon Valley in 2015, and that's kind of how I got involved.
So what version of Kubernetes were you using back then? Was that pre 1.0?
That was like, I think at that KubeCon they did a 1.0 or something like that, and so yeah, it was really
Wow.
early.
I thought I was early with 1.2, but that's seriously early.
Honestly, I don't remember at all. Yeah, it's early.
So yeah, so what you're saying is for anyone looking to get into open source, just scream loudly at the back of a conference hall, and you should be
Yeah,
good to go.
enthusiasm works. Yeah,
That's true. What was the initial kind of contribution process like back then?
Yeah, so I was involved in contributing to it before it was open source. But at that time, we were all really excited about people being excited about what we were working on. And so we had a Slack channel, and generally people would kind of come ask questions in the Slack channel and open PRs, and it was a really casual process. But we were very excited that people were joining our Slack channel, and even like we didn't mean for this to be like and what ended up being a larger open source project. We just were building it to help ourselves, and we decided to open source it. So when people came and they wanted to contribute and they were having trouble, we were like, yeah, we'll absolutely get on a call with you. We'll talk to you, we'll pair with you. And so it was a pretty close process. It wasn't like a foreign, oh, you're contributing something kind of like, somewhere far away. It was very, very collaborative, especially in the early days. I remember Bitnami got involved really early, and we had a call with them. And Butch, our one of the founders of the Helm project, was like, why don't you just compile your code and show them what you're working on? And I was like, oh yeah, sure, that sounds fine. So that's what the process was, essentially.
That's the best way. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. So your talks on Helm, in my eyes at least, became legendary. So what made you decide to start speaking about the project like at the early days?
Yeah, I think like at first I just wanted to build the muscle. Like at first I was just like, yeah, let me learn how to speak about a project. That seems like a valuable skill to have. And then it became, oh my gosh, I get free conference tickets. Like let's go, and then just meeting people was really great. And, just helping like figure out like, or essentially when I'm doing a talk, like I like to try to make an argument, and I like to try to like persuade people with my own kind of story or spin on it. And I just really like that process. It was fun. And it was fun to meet people and help them contribute, and me contribute to other things as well. So yeah, like
yeah, I think like the free conference ticket is definitely one of the winners. I think also when it comes to giving talks, you have to understand it at a level where you can kind of distill it down to the very, very basic building blocks. And that takes a lot of effort. Obviously when you've been building it since the beginning, like you've got that good base level understanding. But I think like teaching someone and telling somebody how something works, you have to be able to distill it down. And that can be multiple levels of distilling, right? Because sometimes that person doesn't understand what the first thing or first analogy you're using is. So I find it really interesting to try and think as someone that's new to like what I'm talking about, like, does this land? Yeah, and it's always an interesting kind of thought process when I'm putting a talk together. I don't know if you have the same.
Yeah. It's like you have to know all the context around the thing that you're building too. Like you have to know the thing that you're building on top of, and then the thing how people are using it. So
yeah, that's true.
It's like a lot of layers of trying to figure that out, but it's good because I learn a lot of things when I'm building talks. Like I learn where my gaps are in understanding, and I have to know them because I feel like people are a little nicer now, but like when I was first starting out, there were a lot of really pointed questions, and you really had to know, and if you didn't know, that was okay. But it'd be better if you kind of prepped in that way. So yeah,
I remember those days. I think we're edging towards those days not existing anymore. I think there's still little bits and pieces there, but it's a lot better than what it was, thankfully.
For sure. Yeah.
So you've been involved in numerous successful open source projects, right? If I think of the ones off the top of my head, you've got Helm, Drift, you've got CNAB, you've got Open Service Mesh, and now Spin. Like, what common patterns have you observed in like these projects that help them thrive?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to see, like I've had projects that have gone really far and also a bunch of projects that didn't go anywhere. And it's really interesting to see the difference. So for projects that did really well, I noticed that it was a little bit of right time, right place, but it was a lot of being very concise and being able to distill like what the objective of the project is, first of all. I'm being very clear about that. And then after that, it was just a lot of collaboration, like being open early, being transparent early. The projects that I waited to open source until they were kind of fully baked or mostly baked didn't do as great as the ones that we open source early. And a lot of times it's very hard to do that as a developer because you're like, oh, I want it to be perfect, you know? But I found that it's better to have like a more unbaked project kind of go out there, because then everybody gets to like be a part of the journey. Like you're like, this is what I have so far. If you want to help, jump in. There's a lot of places to help. And then when more and more people kind of get invested, you get a lot of perspectives. You know this, I'm sure, very well as well. Like more people get invested and then get excited about the project and want to contribute, and you just build momentum. So there's usually some early momentum building that happens in these successful projects, whether it's through contributions or through very active Slack channels or through workshops. But like you have to do the work, you know, in the beginning to and be a little bit I think feel a little exposed, like
Yeah.
be okay with it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, right? And especially if there are multiple avenues where people can dive in, the contributions naturally happen. If it's like too close to perfect, there's not very many edges that need to be rounded out. So it's kind of challenging for new contributors, especially people that may be new to the language that it's written in, to kind of contribute to
Yeah.
those. So yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. So if we take that kind of on the flip side, like what would you say are some of the common pitfalls or anti-patterns that you've seen that projects should avoid even?
Yeah, I've sometimes seen like gatekeeping, like a little bit of like, no, this is not gonna work, or like, no, we're not gonna do this. And the no's are fine. Like you have to have some boundaries and you have to have some scope. But I find that a default yes is better, because then the person contributing usually generally has like a good reason for why they're contributing. It takes a lot out of a person to actually open a pull request on a project they didn't build. So they've thought about it. It's not out of nowhere. It's generally fine. So I think the hard no's are really difficult for people to hear and see and interact with. And I think we should minimize those as much as possible. Also not doing documentation early. You gotta document early, and you just got to be transparent. I think the transparency bit is difficult too. If someone's asking you for something or some reason as to why we're doing something, it's just, I don't know, taking too long to answer that or being harsh about it, I just find is never helpful to anybody involved. So yeah, those are some of the pitfalls that I've also made too, by the way. I'm not calling anybody out. I have done all of these.
Same.
So
Yeah, I think it's about being empathetic, right, and understanding the other side and meeting the person in the middle. Just
yeah.
You don't understand necessarily from the pull request the reason why they're submitting this feature change, and actually, if you go and speak to them, it may make a ton more sense, and then you may get some understanding, and then maybe actually, yeah, we can take that feature a little bit further, or that change a little bit further to encompass something else.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do you or the wider team that you work with and have worked in the past kind of balance maintaining what I would call technical excellence with building this kind of inclusive and welcome community?
Yeah, I think what helps a lot is and this is something that Kubernetes does a lot of, and I think we've taken from that community. But doing proposals helps a lot for everything that you're doing that is, significant. Is a significant change on the project. Like we have on the Spin project, we have Spin improvement proposals. I think on Helm they have Helm improvement proposals, Kubernetes enhancement proposals.
Caps.
Caps, yeah. So there's, I think Service Mesh had one as well, or Service Mesh Interface had one as well. So we've just kind of copied this process. I think that's helped a lot in terms of making sure we are not just pushing in something technically because we're like, oh yeah, the solution applies to this problem, so we're just going to do it. There's a bit of a process. There's some transparency around it. And it's inclusive because, it's not just generally for the projects that I work in, it's not just the maintainers who are submitting these proposals. It can be anyone. And it helps build an inclusive environment because if anybody can understand the why, then anybody can question what the next step in this proposal or in this feature lifecycle should be. And I want to give everybody kind of a level playing field, whether you've been working on the project for years or you just started. If you're willing to try it out, do the work and get involved, then there should be very little to no barriers to entry. And we should always try to reduce that. And it just so happens that also means that you're going to be building a robust project because you have to tell people why you're building the thing.
Yeah, I actually really like them. Like the caps specifically, like it's one of the things that I've brought into previous roles that I had kind of similarly, which is like if we're building out a feature, we'll put an enhancement proposal together. And I think it's good because it actually makes you sit down and think about what you're doing and actually define the reasons behind some of the decisions that you would like to make. And then, like you said, right, lets everybody jump in, start to, put some circles around a couple of points, or like when you next have a community meeting, we were having regular planning sessions, so it's slightly different. But when you have a regular community meeting, you've got something that you can look at and point to and talk about. And hopefully people have read it before, but if they haven't, then you can all start reading it when you're on the community call. And I think it really helps, not even just with open source projects, even closed source ones. I think it helps, especially like it makes the team more inclusive as well, because they all feel like they're bought in and it's not just the leads of the project or the features internally that are the ones that are building it.
Yeah, it's amazing how much our industry boils down to communication and being able to explain things.
Yeah, pretty much. Being able to explain, communicate openly and transparently, that's basically it. So what would be your top 3 pieces of advice for those in the audience looking to start either a open source project themselves or wanting to get involved in maintaining one or collaborating?
For open source projects yourself, I feel like I think being clear about what your project solves, like what the problem is going to take you miles. Like I've read a lot of READMEs in my life, and sometimes it's really hard to figure out what problem this project is solving. And so I can't grasp within a minute or two that, and it just makes me less likely to use the project. Again, I've done this myself. You probably read my own READMEs and see this issue, but that's one big thing. And I think if you're contributing, like on the other side, it's good to know like what problem the project is solving, because sometimes you're trying to fit like, what is it called? A square peg in a round hole, and it's just like not going to work. So on both sides, understanding the objective is good as a good first step. I think if you're building your own project, do demos, like put the work in for into your documentation early, even if it doesn't look good, even if it's just markdown and you don't have like a documentation website and it's under a docs directory, like just put anything down. I think people like seeing demos, like short demos. That's definitely gotten me very far with a lot of my projects. And invest in, I think my third thing would be like invest in answering questions and getting contributors early, because if people get in early, they can help you. And also build a more, just you'll have more perspectives, you'll build a more robust project, they'll feel excited and you'll feel excited, and it's a win-win for everybody. So
Yeah, I think I agree with all of those. And one that I would add is like we talk a lot right now about sustainability in general, but I think there's a human element to that as well. So it's like when you're starting a project, try not to do everything yourself, right? Learn to delegate and trust other people. That's obviously an ongoing process, but like create these explicit decision making processes right before you need them. Like we're talking about KEPs as an example,
yeah,
and like
yeah,
plan for this maintainer succession, right? And not burnout prevention, because you can end up getting burnout when you're maintaining projects pretty quick.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and these kinds of things are so much easier now, I feel like, than maybe like 8 years ago. I feel like the CNCF and GitHub have like put into in place like so many good boilerplate tools that we can just use. So I've personally been using those, a lot of copy paste, or grabbing licenses from GitHub and things like that.
So Shiva asks an interesting question that I'll pass to you, Michelle, which is, as a newbie, how much importance should I give to the stage of a CNCF project or any open source project as it is right now?
I guess as a newbie, as a contributor, I think I think all stages have their pros and cons. There's obviously going to be maybe more help, maybe in different ways, I think in a more mature project. Like for example, in Kubernetes, there's a whole contributor ladder, and there's different processes put in place for contributing. And I think that can be really great. It kind of depends on how you want to contribute. So you got to like know that first. So I'm, for example, someone who in some parts of my life really like an entire framework built out for me. And I just like to check the boxes. And I think larger projects and more mature projects have those kind of that framework built out for contributing. And then in some parts of my life, I'm like, I don't want to be so rigid, or I don't want to have a whole framework. I just want to get involved in something I'm excited about and it be really relaxed. And I just want to talk to the person who just wrote, this 6,000 lines of code, and I want to ask them why. And I feel like when the project's a little bit less mature, you get more of an opportunity to do that. And so it kind of depends on how you work best. And again, we might work best at different times in our life, or the year or the week. So yeah.
Shiva, are you talking about maintaining, contributing, or using? Because I think that's an interesting dynamic for all three of those.
Yeah.
I think personally for me, it's like, do I find the project interesting? Right? Like if I have a passion for solving that problem, then I'm naturally a little bit more inquisitive. And then I think the community, to your point, Michelle, is like super important, right? How comfortable do you feel as an individual opening your mouth and joining those community calls and saying something? Is it like am I going to get shut down because I should have read the documentation, or is it going to be open and inclusive and everyone's just going to help you figure out what the problem is or move forward with what you're doing?
Yeah.
Contributing. Yeah, I would say those two things, and additionally what Michelle said as well. I think for me, it's how comfortable do I feel with the community and with the project maintainers. I think that's super important. If there's a good collaboration there, it makes life a lot easier, right? When you're submitting that 6,000 line PR, you're probably going to get 10, 15, 20 comments, and you want them to be nice ones. So you don't want to have a difficult conversation with someone.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit to kind of community building and governance, because you co-founded the SIG apps. Was a significant milestone, right? So what gaps did you see at the beginning that kind of led you to that creation of that SIG? So for anyone that's listening, SIG is special interest group.
Yeah. And more context. Yeah. Kubernetes has special interest groups. That's where we collaborate and kind of work on the different sets of APIs, or there's one for different things like tooling. There used to be an overall architecture one. I don't know if that's still a thing, but there'd be like a special interest group for different topics. Kubernetes SIG apps was this it was a place for people to meet. It was a bit of an intersection around the people who were using Kubernetes very early, and specifically the apps API concept, so pods, deployments, things like that. And it was a place for the people who are working on those APIs to meet the people who were using those APIs. And so we found that we're very early, and we found some things that we didn't understand or we had questions on, or we wanted to influence, or some gaps we thought we could make some suggestions. And so there was no place to actually physically talk to someone about those things. And Kubernetes SIG Apps was born to solve that problem. And it was great. It was fun because we started that meeting off with like 2 5-minute demos. And so demos are nice because, who doesn't love a demo? And if they're short, even better. And people were excited to see like all the things people were building on top of Kubernetes. Just a simple deploy was exciting. Anything was exciting at that time.
Were you screaming on the conference call?
I was screaming on mute, but there was a lot of enthusiasm. There's a lot of, oh my God. Anyway, so yeah. There's a lot of wooing in my life. I think I have also wooed on stage too.
Yeah, I was about to say you have actually. I remember you wooing on stage. You're the woo queen.
Thank you. So yeah, I don't know if I should be embarrassed. Anyway, yeah, so it was cool. We did 5-minute demos, and then we would talk about different topics, and just a casual bi-weekly meeting. It was very consistent. You could come whenever you wanted, and yeah, that was what I was born out of.
So you've obviously been on a lot of different boards for different things, right? If we look at Kubernetes Steering Committee, the CNCF Governing Board, Technical Oversight Committee, like what have you learned about effective project governance through those roles?
Yeah, so maybe we can talk about governance as a whole too.
Sure.
Like, what does that mean? So when we're talking about governance, we're talking about managing the project, managing decisions on the project, whether they be marketing or money or organizational or technical. And how do you make sure that that project is healthy and has longevity and doesn't completely collapse because a maintainer steps away? There's not overall fights and forking, which the drama is always exciting, but you don't always want that on the thing that you rely on. So we don't want that. And I got to serve on the Kubernetes Steering Committee, on the governance board, and on the technical oversight committee. And I've learned a lot about just being transparent. I think sometimes folks are really not wanting to say what they really feel in like a meeting, and it takes a lot, but that's kind of the job of someone in governance, is to your duty is to bring about the concerns that your community has and to find effective solutions. And so being transparent, even in the smallest ways, is something you have to build a skill on. And for developers, especially for me, that's not the background I came in. I sat next to a bunch of MBAs and CEOs and VPs on the governance board in the CNCF. And I was like one of 2 developers, and I was like, I have no idea what's going on here. But eventually I kind of figured out, if I don't like this thing, I got to speak up about it. And so I think the biggest thing I think a developer can take away from being on these governance committees is you got to speak up. There's a lot, I will be really honest, there is a lot of like silence in meetings I've seen, and then there's a lot of back channeling and like being angry after the meeting, and I'm like, no, you got to like say what you mean at the meeting. So I don't know, that's my big lesson learned on these governance boards.
Yeah, I think I haven't obviously served on governance boards, but I think in meetings in general, right, I think it's really important that people just feel comfortable enough, and there's a safe space where you can just say whatever you're thinking. Like sometimes that message doesn't want to be heard, but it needs to be said, otherwise the project or role or company or team doesn't move forward. So I think it's
Yeah,
very
and
important to just be transparent.
yeah, and sometimes you have competing interests, like, I think the governance board and the governance meetings are a place where you have to keep coming back to what is the objective of the project, who do you actually serve, and what is going to make the overall project healthy. So sometimes uh, decision making gets a little hairy, I feel like, and I'm sure you've run into this as well in governance. I feel like it's the same story, but decisions kind of sometimes become vague or difficult until you kind of come back to this rock, like, okay, well, we serve the open source community of this project. These are our goals, and what's going to be the best thing for everybody, not just one company or not just one maintainer. And a lot of times it's kind of powwowing on over that and coming back to that.
Yeah, especially at Kubernetes, right? There's a ton of companies that are, that are all heavily invested. So aligning those must be challenging. So one of your other notable achievements was bootstrapping the Kubernetes Code of Conduct Committee. So how does that, do you think, tie into building this kind of thriving open source community that we both work within?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I was not a code of conduct expert and still am not, but in the steering committee, we had to kind of figure out what are the gaps that our community has, and how do we figure that out? How do we fill them? And of course, every community is going to have some sort of code of conduct issues that come up. We're not all from the same place, especially, in Kubernetes, we're from different places, different backgrounds, we're different types of people, and we might have misunderstandings. And sometimes there is harassment and not great things happen that are, that don't have that actions with really bad intentions. And so the first level is always to try to mitigate those things. And the second level is try to, solve the issue by having open, transparent communication. But then if, things don't work out, depending on what your process is in your community, you have to take other steps. And having a board do that, or having a code of conduct committee do that, is really essential. My job in this was to bootstrap the committee enough so that we could fill it with people who are subject matter experts, and go forward. But a big thing that I learned in that process was that you don't have to have all the answers on the governance committee, but you have to figure out a way to provide a framework for your community to fill a void. And so bootstrapping the committee was building an initial framework for how they're going to work together, kind of setting up elections or setting up a selection process, and then kind of giving the committee an objective to meet going forward is what I was involved in. And then Paris Pittman and George Castro did so much good work on the Kubernetes side of things. They did a lot of research into how Mozilla, for example, was dealing with code of conduct issues. And Mozilla has all this awesome documentation online. And so we actually took a lot of inspiration from them when building the initial code of conduct committee and the framework for resolving issues.
Are you still loosely associated with it, or not so much nowadays?
No, set it up, and I let the people who
know what they're
did
doing
that stuff.
better than you deal with it.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So you're probably aware we have a tradition on this show where the previous guest leaves the question for the next guest, not necessarily knowing who they are or what they're going to talk about. So Alessio Voza, shout out Alessio, you incredible podcast last week, asks, what was the scariest moment of your career to date? And most importantly, why?
The scariest moment was actually, I had someone, it's not like a fun story, but it really truly was the scariest moment. I had God, this is a really good question, by the way. I was at a dinner after after a conference, and someone much more influential than me in the community kind of told me I was doing the wrong thing on Helm and on my projects, and he was very adamant about this particular thing. And I just got really I got really scared, actually. And he was way more influential than I was, way more experienced than me. And we had a good debate, but he got a little aggressive. So that was, I think, very scary for me, because I didn't want something that I say to him be the reason that he, kind of blew up at the project, or
Yeah.
got really upset at the whole at the whole community or something. So yeah, that was really scary for me. Eventually he apologized and we were fine. But in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, did I do something terrible? And
Yeah, I can imagine. I've been in a similar situation previously, and it's like you tread very, very carefully and you think a lot before you open your mouth. And then you just like, I don't know about you, but afterwards I was just like, they're just another human. Like,
Yeah.
we all have opinions. Some of them are, strongly held. And I think it's good that we're debating these things. Otherwise, like you said, right, it's back channels and people getting annoyed with themselves just privately and not feeling like they can open up and talk. But yeah, it's difficult to deal with that, I think.
Yeah.
So in 2017, I was there, by the way. You keynoted, and you were the co-chair on the EU. Were you co-chair also on the North America as well in 2017?
Yeah. End of the year in Texas.
Those are the good old days when everything was a lot
Yeah.
easier. How was that?
Yeah.
How was that experience keynoting? Like, it's something that I've always wanted to do, but never had the chance to do it.
Oh my
So
gosh, you should totally do it. I loved it at that time. I don't actually like speaking anymore that much. I don't know why. I've gotten like a lot shyer since post
no way.
pandemic for some. Yeah,
Really?
I have. I've only done like 1 or 2 talks. I'm gonna try to get into it, but I think I'm gonna try to do more like small group settings. I don't love the big stage as much, but I'm really happy that I got the chance to do it. Dan Cohn, who's like the executive director, or was the executive director of the CNCF at the time, he passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago. But I was co-chairing with Kelsey Hightower, and he was on this call with us, and he asked me like a few times. He was like, Michelle, I think you should keynote. I think you should keynote. I was like, I don't have anything to say. Like, I don't know. So I actually dodged it 3 times because I didn't understand what he was asking me. I was like, no way. Like, I don't get it. But then he was like, no, Michelle, you really need to do this keynote. And I was like, okay, cool. And I'm so glad I did, because it really changed my career. It was such a great opportunity. I think what I learned from it is that everybody has a story to tell, every single person. And I learned how to tell my own story. At the time, I like created this like metaphor for like I had this metaphor around like how Kubernetes kind of changed deployments. We were going from like, I think, a broom to a vacuum to a full-on Roomba
Yep.
situation. And it was fun for me. I thought it was really cool that I, could say something in my own voice. But keynotes are really fun because that's not a talk, right? Like a talk is like you're teaching something, or you're kind of like getting from point A to point B, or doing a tutorial essentially. But a keynote is like you're building a metaphor, or you're like, trying to inspire, and you don't have to know everything. You just have to kind of build this like idea, and to kind of point people in a particular direction. And so, and you do it based on your personal experience. And I think it's a very authentic way to provide a perspective. And I really enjoy doing it.
Yeah, it was great.
I guess,
if I remember it correctly, you made some analogy to Beyonce. I think it was either Beyonce or Rihanna, or I can't
that
remember exactly what it was. But
that was a different talk.
Oh, it
It
was.
was an I did a Helm, and I used the top 50 like songs on like the billboards,
That's it.
and that was really fun too, because I got to do a lot of music research. So that was a good time.
So at Fermyon Tech now, we're going all the way forward now to your most recent active role, you're working on spin, right? Can you distill spin to people who are not aware of what WASM even is?
Okay. Yeah, totally. So if let's see. So we were working on we were working on containers actually. I was working on containers before WebAssembly stuff, and with containers, you kind of hit this wall when you're doing serverless stuff, because when you're starting up a container, it takes sometimes 500 milliseconds to a few seconds versus WebAssembly, which takes microseconds to start up. And so when we were working with containers, we kind of started running into some issues, and we started like kind of always coming back to how WebAssembly solves these problems. So for example, a WebAssembly application is more portable than containers. You don't have to have like a different build for a different type of architecture. It's much faster. So if speed is a quick startup time is like a big thing for you, then it's a good thing to look at. It's got some really great security properties. So with a container, for example, you're going to need to lock it down. It's going to have access to your system resources, your file system, your network, etc. But then you build a lot of rules and safeguards to make it like not talk to anything that it's not supposed to. But in WebAssembly, it's denial by default. Its security principle is very much that you can't do anything unless someone has explicitly granted you some permission to do that thing. And so while I was at Microsoft, actually, I started learning about WebAssembly for a variety of different reasons, a variety of different problems, and eventually I got very obsessed with this piece of tech. And I was like, no, this is the next thing. I think this is so cool. So some of my colleagues and I started a company around it. It's called Fermyon. And we build tools, and we have a cloud for building serverless WebAssembly applications. And Spin is an open source tool that lets you do that. So if you're just getting started with WebAssembly and you're interested in some of its properties, Spin is a great way for you to jump in and get started. It's a developer framework, and it's a runtime for building and running WebAssembly applications. And you should check it out.
Yeah, we're doing a Project Spotlight episode in a couple of weeks, so I'm excited to see what you've been up to. Why Fermyon, out of interest, as a name?
It's like has reference to some physics particle. And I never have a good answer for this question, which is the worst. Yeah.
Ask Matt.
Yeah, please do.
All right, I'll ask Matt, and I'll let everybody know next week.
Sounds good. Thanks.
So
and let me know.
For engineers just starting their cloud native journey, like what areas would you recommend they focus on? I find this myself pretty challenging to answer, so I'm asking everybody the same kind of question.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a wide landscape. I feel like people, rather than think, I guess like what does cloud native journey mean? So maybe if you're deploying to Kubernetes, or you're deploying, or you want to build and deploy applications in a cloud agnostic, vendor agnostic way, how do you do that? And so I think a good place to start would be to figure out how to actually deploy your application to these environments. So I think the thing that you touch the most is the best way to start. So if you start with Helm, or you start with some GitOps framework, I think those are good ways to start something end user facing, and then work your way down to the lower level concepts. I think we were talking about like kind of figuring out what problem you want to solve, and then finding the tool that solves that out of the landscape is a good approach.
Yeah, I agree. Otherwise, everything looks like a nail if you try and use the same tool for absolutely everything.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about your life beyond tech. So I know, and I remember when I was reading these notes beforehand, I kind of giggled a little bit. So you like to try and learn tennis every other year. So what keeps bringing you back to it despite the challenges of learning it?
I just really like the idea of my only job being to watch this ball and to hit this ball over the net. Like, I just think that's really cool. I want to be better at it. Every 12 to 18 months, I like get lessons and never stay committed to it, unfortunately. But I just like it. I just think it's fun.
Who's your favorite tennis player?
I don't have a favorite tennis player. I don't even know. I don't even know. I don't know.
You just like the physics of it generally.
Yeah, I'm not like a avid watcher or anything. My husband took me to like a Atlanta Open match and I thought that was really cool, but sitting out there in the heat watching people hit this ball was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to hit the ball myself. So
I think it's a good skill, right, to have, and also like it takes you away from what you're currently doing and kind of is a useful distraction, which I think is very important in today's society and the landscape and kind of lives that we're living in the open source world, and especially the startup world, right? You need that kind of that just saves like space where you can disconnect for half an hour, 40 minutes. I don't know how long these tennis lessons were, but
yeah, it's like great to not be like behind a screen. Do you have like a non-screen activity that you do?
I just go out for walks and hikes, and I have this concept of a digital detox where I lock away
Mhm.
all the tech like once every month. So I can't use my phone, I can't use my laptop, and it forces me to do something else. Whether that be like go for a hike somewhere else, like further away from my house, or read a book that I tell myself that I'm going to read constantly but never actually do it, or just
Nice.
go and do something else, see the family, go and see friends. Yeah, they're my kind of go-tos. I think
How long do you
especially like yeah, being I spent the last 2.5 years at a startup, similarly to yourself, and I think you can very easily get consumed by it, um, and you just need to force yourself to disconnect. And I'll hold my hands up. I wasn't very good at it for a while when I was there. I was better at it in previous gigs when I was consulting and traveling a lot. But yeah, I'm back to it religiously now. I think it's very important. Walk every lunchtime, 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. No excuses.
I'm inspired. I'm gonna have to do that today.
Yeah, even when it's raining, like just put an anorak on and different shoes. How do you balance kind of tech work with other interests?
I used to be the type of person who would like always be, coding on the weekends or doing some sort of a project. I don't do that anymore. I just sometimes I want to even, but and I think I might get it. There's a few things that I'm excited about in terms of tech that's non work stuff, so I may get back into that. But generally, I just my cousins come over, we play poker, we hang out on my deck. I'm living the suburban life now. Before I was city hopping and just things are a little bit slower for me now. So I just really like to get out, spend some time with the family, and just slow down a little bit on the weekends.
Good for you. Yeah, don't do those things during the week. Keep your weekends free. Do other
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So, what advice would you give to someone wanting to start their own path? Right. If we go all the way back to the beginning, they're kind of like a lot of the people that I've been talking to in the Cloud Native Club don't even do technology. Right. They're just like interested in it.
Okay.
So so where would you? Maybe that was you in a previous life. I'm not sure. In your kind of journey all the way back, or maybe you just kind of landed in tech straight away. But I'd be intrigued to get your opinion on where the best place to start would be.
Yeah, I got into tech because I just saw that there was a problem and I wanted to solve it. And I hired someone to build this website for me. And then I needed to maintain the website. So I started taking computer science classes, which was a very long route
Wow.
to make a website. um,
You must have
was
really
not
wanted that website.
Yeah, I really did. I thought it was going to be like the next big thing. It was not the next big thing, but I did learn a lot, and I did graduate with a computer science degree because of it. Um, So, but I think it's like for people who are non-tech, I really love hearing about the problems that they're having that tech can solve, and then hearing about them solving it. Um, and so I think that that's a good place to start. I don't think you have to get a computer science degree. I think you just ask a question and then go down the rabbit hole of actually answering that question and stick with it. And there's so many resources now. Like when I was learning about programming, there were not the courses and all this stuff now. So I think that there's great stuff now online for all that.
Yeah, agreed. I was thinking back to like 2015 when I was trying to figure out what Kubernetes was, and just trying to read it and having absolutely no idea. And then God bless his soul, like Kelsey just replied to my tweet and
Oh,
jumped on a Google Meet with me and kind of explained it in half an hour. And I was like, I don't even know who this guy is. And then I found out actually who he is and how influential he is. And I was like, wow, you took like 30 minutes of your day to explain to a complete beginner what Kubernetes was. Because I could explain what Docker Swarm was, but like Kubernetes was
mhm.
a whole nother beast. And I was like, I can't go into a company and try and explain what Kubernetes is to some kind of level where they'll let me deploy it, because I think it was the right solution at the time. I need to be able to distill it down to a level where everyone conceptually understands what this thing is and how it works. But yeah, he was incredible.
He's
He explained it as a
awesome.
bowl of fruit.
A bowl of fruit.
Multiple bowls
Oh,
of fruits, and essentially how you're the hand and you work out if you want the apple next to the orange or whether you want all the oranges together.
I have never heard that one, and that is awesome.
Yeah, it landed like it was 30 seconds in. I kind of conceptually got it, and then we went a couple of layers deeper than that.
That's so cool. I love that. And he's awesome. Oh my gosh. The amount of time that man has spent with people is like, and including me, is just like so nice.
Yeah, it's mind blowing. So, given your experience with CNCF projects, what would you say is the most common misconception people have about getting involved in the cloud native ecosystem?
Common misconception. I think that you like have to know a particular language or a particular thing. I think you can get involved with little to no experience. I think it's the community is so big now that you need people with all types of experience, like you would at any company. And so if you're wanting to get into the development side of things, for example, but you have, a different type of experience, you can get in contributing that different type of experience and then work your way towards the development side, for example, or vice versa. I feel like it's just a really good ecosystem. They've set it up really well, and it's very diverse and mature now. And so it's get in with whatever you want.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many avenues you can take. I think previously that wasn't necessarily the case. Like I know a bunch of C developers, for example, that were kind of like, well, I don't know what to do here because everything in Cloud Native is written in Go, and it's like
Yeah.
not anymore. Like
Yeah.
it's a different multitude of languages that are being used. So I've spent kind of 50 minutes asking you questions. Is there any questions you want to ask myself?
Yeah. What projects are you most excited about right now? I'm very curious about that.
So anything wasm based for obvious reasons. I think we were talking about this before, right? There's so many levers that it can help pull. Specifically, one of the projects I remember working on when we were moving to ARM nodes and having to recompile absolutely everything, and wasm's just like, oh, done. You can just move across. And I think the developer experience side is what interests me the most about that project, that kind of ecosystem, and how it's going to simplify the work that needs to be done on building applications and kind of composing them and putting them together. Those are ones, and then there's another one called what's it called now? It's called Volcano, I think. I think that's the one. Yeah, it's called
Data-
it's something to do with databases. I think it's called Volcano. Maybe I'm getting the name wrong. But I contribute to the Flux project, although my contributions have dropped significantly since I started a new role. Um, maintainership's hard, so anyone that's maintaining, I give them a lot of props. Um, so yeah, I'm a lot of GitOps based tooling is kind of where I'm spending a lot of my time at the moment. But
Cool.
yeah, the
Okay.
ecosystem's just booming. There's another project every other day.
Now,
It's kind of keeping
what
track.
what has like taken you most by surprise? Because you've been in it, I think, just as long as I have. I think we've kind of started at the same time, maybe, or around the same time, kind of
Yeah,
in the
I was
earlier days.
2015, I think.
Same, yeah. So, like, what has surprised you the most? Anything shocking?
I think the adoption. I knew it was a great piece of tech, but I never thought it would get as big as how big it got. Like I remember I was in Paris at KubeCon last year, 13,000 people, and I remember when we were at the early ones, we weren't even in double-digit thousands, right? And it felt very very small at that time. Now it's vast, and I think the community aspect is still there even at that scale. And I think that took me quite a lot by surprise. I thought the community would kind of go off into these niche areas and wouldn't kind of come back and collaborate. We would end up with, like we do have, observability cons, but I was expecting like, oh, we're going to have all of these project cons because we're just going to get so big. But actually, KubeCon is still there. And we still have this centralized place where people can come and collaborate and meet up and get to chat and get to talk to people that they only know over Zoom calls or randomly. So like an interesting one was in Paris. I met Sevi, who's from Holland, and I know her because her and I were chatting on TGIK, going back and forward every week, and we hadn't met before, and we literally met in Paris, which is incredible. So I think those are the two big ones for me, and I think just the amount of people that are involved in the project. Like if we just take Kubernetes as a whole, just that on its own, the amount of people is absolutely incredible. Like people know
Mhm.
probably the top couple of people, but actually there's a whole plethora of people underneath. Some of them are known, some of them are not known. I just think that's
Yeah,
absolutely incredible.
yeah. I think it's wild seeing like remembering when companies or organizations were just learning about Kubernetes and now like they're all bought in and have been running it for years and have teams around it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I remember doing a workshop with you, or I remember meeting people who were kind of new to the space and then now they're cloud native experts and like are consulting or like, head of platform engineering or whatever it was and or whatever it is. And that's so like exciting to see that the change happens so fast.
Yeah, I think the mind blowing, like there were a couple of mind blowing moments. Like the first one was like when people actually came up to me at conferences knowing who I was and I never knew who they were. Like I just found that like really strange and overwhelming. Um,
Yeah.
that was personally one. The other one was when CERN got on stage and said they were using Kubernetes. That blew my mind. I was like, "You're using Kubernetes to do at CERN?" Like that.
Yeah.
I was never expecting that.
I was shocked with the OpenAI and I'm really proud that we had OpenAI keynote in Germany in 2017. And now like, OpenAI is like blown up, but like, I was like so excited to see kind of that whole thing progress.
Yeah, that's I. Now you remind me. I remember listening to that. That's a long.
And
Go ahead.
tech has a really short memory, I feel like. Oh, and I also had the same experience. Like I remember doing talks and then having people come up to me and be like, "Oh, I've seen your talk," or you know who I am before I knew who they were. But it's great because I really enjoy meeting everybody, and I think that's awesome. But yeah, it was really. I totally share your experience. It was really shocking to me as well.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's an interesting experience, and like that's why I put this together to give back to all of these people that have helped me previously. So if we can help the next generation, that's paying it forward.
For sure.
So yeah, Michelle, I just want to say thanks for sharing your journey and valuable insights over the last hour. Like, I'm sure everybody knows who you are and has worked on projects that you've either maintained or touched previously as a contributor. And I'm super excited, and I know everybody else is, for the stuff that's coming out of you guys at Fermyon. So yeah, is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really grateful for the experience. I'm, just really happy that I can share my experience. It's a really, open source is a crazy ride, but
Yes.
I'm really grateful I've gotten the chance to do and work on all these projects. And yeah, I'm happy to help anybody who, needs anything in this space. And thanks again for having me.
No problem. Will we see you in London? That's the question.
Oh, in London? Oh, I'm not sure yet. Probably.
I'll speak to Matt.
Probably. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. And yeah, for everyone wondering, Michelle will be back in a few weeks for a project spotlight on SpinCube. So we'll go into a bit more detail about what she's been working on at Fermyon. So yeah, until then, I'll see you all next week. Thanks all.
Thanks.